This episode is sponsored by Lucas Helps Dogs, a registered charity helping Sri Lanka's street dogs and cats. Every day, thousands of animals suffer from disease, injury, and uncontrolled breeding. Through sterilisation, vaccination, and emergency veterinary care, we're creating healthier communities for both animals and people. Just £25 can sterilise a street dog or cat and can change lives. If you believe animal welfare is part of responsible travel, please visit www.lucashelpsdogs.com and help them create lasting change. Welcome to the Sustainable Travel Podcast. I'm Emma, your host from That Travel. This is a podcast that interviews a range of different travellers from different backgrounds to see what sustainable travel means to them. I am here today with Vanessa from Spicy Dogs Behaviour, a canine behaviour consultant specialising in rescue and free-living dogs. Vanessa lives in Sri Lanka and works closely with street dogs, helping people better understand behaviour through context and the realities of free-living dog populations. Today we'll be chatting about street dogs, rescue culture, and how to interact with free-living dogs ethically when we travel. I love this topic. I'm so excited about it. Hi, Vanessa. How are you?
Hi, Emma. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, me too. I think anybody who knows me closely on or off Instagram will know that I'm actually a bit dog obsessed. For all like travel's my thing. I really love dogs. Like it's something that I have a lot of passion about. I foster dogs myself. I have a rescue. So obviously this topic is going to be something I'm very passionate about.
Well, that's great. You found another person that is obsessed by dogs, so we can speak for hours.
I know. Well, when I found your account, I mean, what you do is obviously quite different, I would say, from what anybody else is really doing that I've seen at least. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are, maybe your story and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I'm originally from Italy. I haven't been living in Italy for a long time, but I came to Sri Lanka back in 2019, so 7 years ago now. And I used to work as a pet sitter and dog walker. And at the time, I used to live in Barcelona. I really loved my job, but I really wanted to make a difference. So I was always looking at jobs, in shelters. I always volunteered in shelters in my free time, but I really wanted to make a difference and start working properly in shelter in the rescue world. So I found a job online for a shelter in Sri Lanka, and I had traveled prior to that to Sri Lanka, and I really, really liked the country. So I was like, oh wow, dogs and beautiful island. So I straight applied for it, got the job, and after a few months, I packed my stuff and I just left and went to Sri Lanka without really knowing how long I would have been there. Um, I ended up staying at the position at the shelter where I started working for around 7 months. And then I realized that it wasn't for me. I wasn't really, um, yeah, I was questioning the ethics behind this shelter. But I wasn't ready to really leave the country and the dogs because I really loved it. So I decided to stay. And I actually started with a group of friends to organize spay and neuter events. And shortly after we started, COVID arrived. And I remember I had to take a decision whether to go back home or stay in Sri Lanka. And I remember having my last repatriation flight and deciding that I wanted to stay. I found an opportunity to look after someone's dog, someone that was actually stuck in the UK and the dog was stuck in Sri Lanka. So I stayed and looked after the dog. And yeah, I never left since, and I'm really glad I did because it ended up being an amazing COVID time. And from there, my work with dogs continued when the restrictions were lifted. I traveled to the north of the country and I helped another rescuer set up a shelter there, and we did a spay and neuter event there as well. And that's where I rescued my own dogs. I have two street dogs. And from there, basically, I knew that I wasn't going to leave because one of my dogs is quite complicated. So I thought that it would be best to stay here. And I continued working, collaborating with other shelters up until I think 2022, 2023. And then because of burnout, I decided to leave completely the rescue world. But in the meantime, I started getting into behavior. As I was saying, one of my dogs is quite fearful and very difficult, and she prompted me to look at behavior in more depth. And after studying for quite a few years, I also realized that what I was studying was difficult to apply to her, that she was just different. She was wired different and she needed a different approach. And that's what I've been doing for the past years, trying to help people that have adopted street dogs, helping them understand who these dogs are so that they can thrive also into a home. So I left the rescue world, but I continue to help dogs in a different way through behavior consultation.
Really cool. Really cool. I mean, when we talk about street dogs in Sri Lanka, I think it's important to set the scene of like what the reality is like over there. So I've just been to Sri Lanka, which I think was how I found your page actually. And the street dog situation there is quite intense. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what's going on, the numbers and the scale of what we're looking at?
Sure. So yeah, there is around, we don't have certain statistic because there hasn't been a census, but they say there is around 3 to 4 million street dogs in Sri Lanka. Considering that is a small island with 22 million people, that's quite a lot of dogs. What needs to be understood though is that these are not stray dogs. They are not like lost pets in the way that we would expect them to be. Street dogs are not human bred. They are selected by nature and they have been living alongside humans for a millennia. They aren't present anymore in many countries in the Western world, but in many countries in the South Global, they continue to live alongside human, and they do not live under human control or within human homes. They just live around, and they have adapted to live there. And that's how they survive. They are highly adapted exactly to the environment where they live in. So when you come to Sri Lanka, but to any country that really has free roaming dogs, it's quite a shock, right? Because you see all these animals living freely and going through their life, and their life, it's hard. There is no way around it. You know, their life has got lots of hardship. They fight with diseases. They fight with parasites. They need to navigate traffic. Many are victim of road traffic accidents. So you will see dogs that are missing fur. You will see dogs with open wounds. Specifically in Sri Lanka is a really humid and warm climate. So parasites thrive. So small wounds can quickly become big wounds, infested wounds. You will see dogs with missing limbs, or if you go to shelters, you will find a lot of disabled dogs, for example, and so on. So there is this visible suffering that you see around. And that's, I think, what strikes the most when you come to a country like Sri Lanka. However, when we understand that these are not lost pets, you can also start to appreciate the fact that these dogs live a very autonomous life. They have a lot of freedom of movement and of behavior. They live life in their own terms. And when you start looking a little bit deeper into their life, you will see that they have really big social networks. They have dog friends. They have people that care for them. They know the places where they can get food. They know the places where they can get shelter, where they can have a sleep, or to get some cuddles. They have these amazing and really interesting lives that unfortunately sometimes we don't see or we don't appreciate enough, because all we can see is just the suffering. But that's a big part. Like, there are hardship, but there is also autonomy, freedom, and agency that it's quite important. They live life in their own terms, and I think that's very beautiful. So some of these dogs that we can see around can be free roaming dogs without a owner, But some of these dogs could also be pets that are allowed to free roam. So you might think, oh, poor dog, it doesn't have anyone, but it's actually someone's pet that is just allowed to go around. Or some other dogs don't have one single owner, but they have the entire community or a neighborhood or a group of people or an organization that actually takes care of that dog. So the dog is allowed to be autonomous and free, but as soon as something happens, there will be people, looking after its needs. So it's more of a community. I like to call them community dogs because it really show the fact that they are not owned by a single person, but they are just taken care by the entire community. And you hardly will see lost pets. That's not something that you see often. There are some cases, but even if there are lost pets, if they are street dogs, they are very adaptable and they often are able to overcome, the initial abandonment and then adapt to the new environment.
Yeah, and I think like there's lots of points that you made there that I kind of want to like expand on a little bit before we get into what we're talking about when it comes to travelers, because I think it is quite important for people to maybe like I don't want to say that people have to adjust their mindset, because I also think we need to consider the people in this situation, right? Like when I was looking into the history of street dogs in Sri Lanka, I know that there was a big situation around 2012 to do, I think it was 2012, when it was to do with like culling of the dogs, and they were deciding whether or not to kind of minimize this population by doing some culling. And as I understand it, a lot of Sri Lankans kind of came forward and said, no, we don't want this. We don't want the dogs to be killed. We'd rather have a free roaming street dog population, community dog population. And then that was when spay and neuter programs started to be put into place. If I'm not wrong, could have had the year wrong, but I know that this was the general history.
Yeah. And then the no-kill policy was introduced. So at the moment, 20 years later, still the no-kill policy is in act. So culling is actually forbidden, and there is no euthanasia practice in the country, which, of course, you can imagine on one side hasn't helped the growing population. It actually continued to grow exponentially, but on the other side, is a more humane attitude towards this dog, that they want to be integrated into the population, to move more towards a coexistence instead of a removal of these dogs.
Yeah.
And I think that's has a lot to do with the fact that Sri Lanka, well, is a multi-religious country, but 70% of the population is actually Buddhist.
It was 2006. I knew I was wrong on the year.
2006 was the no-kill policy was introduced. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So being majority Buddhist country, there are some values, such as like the value of no harm of other living being, that actually fosters more tolerance, right, towards other living beings. So generally speaking, you will see that there is more tolerance. Like dogs are seen as part of the environment, right? Maybe there is not that care that we would expect. Like if there is a dog that needs help, maybe there is not that intervention right away, also because many people are struggling with their own issues, so they don't even have the capacity to take care
Yeah.
of other animals. But there is acceptance. They let the dogs stay in their gardens, or live or sleep in their porch. They will share the leftover food, and they will take care how they can.
Well, like you said,
So
coexistence. Like we've evolved.
exactly,
Mm.
evolving alongside and just accepting animals in the in the environment. Also, you will have a lot of dog feeders here, so that's a common practice. There is also the fact that waste management is not great here. So actually, dogs are a great way of managing food waste. So people do actually put the leftover food for dogs, or dogs will go into the rubbish and just scavenge there. Additionally, many people will leave dogs in need at the local temple, and then the temple will look after the dogs and keep them in the temple grounds and feed them. And as I was saying, there is also this concept of community dogs, so dogs that are kind of looked after by the entire community.
Yeah. So that was also my impression when I was there. I mean, I have spoken to some Sri Lankans about this as well, and would have been super interesting if we could have gotten them on the podcast. But the person that I was speaking to said she wasn't so confident in her English. So I kind of took some words from her on WhatsApp anyway, we were chatting, and that was her feeling too. Um, and what I found is, so for example, when we were in Ella, there was a small puppy that was on in the middle of the road. It had like a head injury. It looked quite unwell, quite sickly. And there was a lot of very concerned people around it, some of which were tourists, some of which were Sri Lankans. And, the tourists was saying we have to call a shelter, we have to like figure out what to do with it. And in the end, it turned out that the Sri Lankans who had seen it first had already gotten it medication from a vet and it was very well cared for. It didn't actually need the intervention from the tourists. Like they were going to monitor it, see how it did, and there was no need for sort of anybody to step in and take it anywhere it didn't need to go, which I found very interesting and like that is a nice model that people are willing to kind of step up and take care of these dogs, even if they don't necessarily belong to them.
Exactly. Yeah. There is not this like ownership that leads to like control.
Yeah.
It's more of a, yeah, helping and coexisting all in the same space. It's also important to remember that the government here doesn't really do much about population control management. There are always talks about, spay and neuter events and models, but up until this year, and still there are talks going on, the government has done very little. There is non-profit organization, both Sri Lankan and foreign, that are doing efforts to help the population through CMVR, so catch, neuter, vaccinate, and release. But there is no government institution that is really tackling the problem, and that's a huge problem.
Yeah, that's difficult. Obviously, in the UK, I assume in Italy too, we have the shelter model, um, which, in my opinion, is also not perfect. It's like, I guess different countries have their own ways of dealing with different things. And I know that I think in the UK, it would not be possible to have the kind of model that they have in Sri Lanka because of our motorways, because of like the fact that our infrastructure is quite compacted into these bigger cities. Well, I know Sri Lanka has big cities as well, but like the way that our cities are laid out, the cars, like I said, the infrastructure, I think it would be very difficult. I personally see before and after I went to Sri Lanka, I see a lot of misconceptions that kind of the street model or the community dog model is way worse than shelters and like these poor dogs are suffering to such an extreme degree. And I'm not kind of agreeing or disagreeing with that, but I do want to say that from my perspective, I also see flaws in the shelter model. And I think a lot of the time what shelters do is essentially just put the suffering behind closed doors so that people
Exactly.
don't have to see it. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? What do you think people need to know about these models?
Well, I think we agree, and I agree with you. I do believe that both systems have their own trades-off, right? So obviously, depending on which shelter, there are different degrees of welfare, as same as depending in which country and also in which areas of the country, there is going to be different level of welfare. So for example, if we take in consideration a dog that lives in a community that doesn't accept it, and there is no restaurants and no food available, the welfare will be very much lower than the welfare of a dog that lives in a touristy area with lots of restaurants and bars and on the beach, for example, where it's safe. And the same will go to, if we look at different kind of shelters, perhaps shelters that house dogs singularly or shelters that have large free roaming populations. So it will depend. But generally speaking, if we look at the trades off, I think when we look at the shelter model, there is always chronic stress because dogs are enclosed and either in large group or in solitary, and that leads to chronic stress. Then there is confinement to different degrees, but there is always confinement. Um, there is isolation and lack of social deprivation and lack of agency. Dogs are enclosed into spaces and they don't have the possibility to go out often or to socialize with other people or other dogs. Um, Many dogs struggle in this kind of system, and many are completely helpless. For example, if we think about very fearful dogs, that are forced to be in contact with either other dogs or other people. And if we look at the street dogs into the shelter model, street dogs will struggle even more because they come from such different situations where they are completely autonomous and not dependent from humans. When you throw them into a shelter, they will struggle even more. But if we look at the street dog model, what do street dogs face every day? They face diseases. They will face injuries, road traffic accident. They are reproducing continuously, so they are having litters after litters that are debilitating the mothers, and they are creating puppies with really low survival rates that will, be into a system that could create more suffering. There is the human-dog conflict.
Yeah.
Many dogs get chased away, many dogs get abused or, injured on purpose. So that's also a big problem. And generally speaking, street dogs, they will have a shorter lifespan, right, than probably shelter dogs that are taken care of. So, like you were saying, I think both models have suffering within it. But the real difference is that in the shelter model, the suffering is kind of hidden behind closed doors because people don't spend every day going inside shelters and looking at the condition of the dog. So we kind of forget about what goes on into shelters. Whereas on the street model, that suffering is really visible, and especially for people that are not used to see dogs on the street, that suffering is so visible and is kind of shocking because we are just not used to see so many dogs living around us, right?
And I think it's really important to say that when we're talking about the shelter model as well, like from my perspective of someone who's kind of working within rescue to a certain extent at the moment with fostering, this is generalized. Like you do get some dogs, and likewise with street dogs, I'm sure, who come through the shelter system completely unscathed and are not like traumatized dogs, like they're in and out, or they just adapt really well to living in the shelter, and like they're not kind of is undergoing this chronic stress that I think a lot of people worry about with rescue dogs. Like you should rescue. I think we're both saying that. Like it's definitely something you should get into. But then likewise, there are probably street dogs that come through this model completely unscathed as well. They adapt really well to living in the street. They've got this incredible community who helps them every day, and they've got this like maybe dependence or maybe routine where they're like used to where to go and that sort of thing. Like I think both models of rescue can be equally they can be equally harmful, they can be equally beneficial, right? In my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also it depends on the individual dog. There are dogs that are thriving on the street and dogs that are really struggling, right? And those dogs might benefit better to be rehomed or, sheltered. And the same goes into the shelter system. There are dogs that are struggling. There are dogs that get euthanized every day because they are not rehomable or because, they have behavioral issues. So absolutely, there is really individual cases for both systems. Yeah.
Very nuanced topic. Like we have to
Yeah.
be a little careful, I guess, with everything. But you also brought up a really good point of the human dog conflict, like the human animal conflict of the whole thing. Obviously, these dogs are not wildlife, so it's not quite the same as when you get like human elephant conflict or different varieties of wildlife. But I imagine in Sri Lanka that's quite frustrating when like they do get maybe, dogs who could bring disease if they've been out on the street for a long time or this sort of thing. And this isn't on my list of questions, so I apologize for throwing you a bit of a curveball. But yeah, I guess that's quite difficult to deal with sometimes for people there.
It is, well, something that is very specific now for Sri Lanka is also that we need to consider is that Sri Lanka is a rabies endemic country, right? So that creates a lot of human dog conflict because people are moved by fear. There is a lot of, I feel there is a lot of, there is lack of resources and education. So people don't really fully understand how you contract rabies, for example, and people don't fully understand how dog behavior works. And so that will install a lot of fear. And from fear, it will install also a different way of approaching dogs, right? And that's what normally creates a lot of the dog human conflict. People being very scared to get bitten because getting bitten by a dog will equal
Yeah.
rabies, and rabies will equal death. So
Scary.
it's
It is
complicated.
scary. Like I think when I was younger, when I first started traveling, I had no idea what dog behavior actually looked like and how to interact with dogs. And even having had dogs as a kid, like I didn't really know anything about them. It wasn't until I got my own rescue dog and because he is a rescue, I suppose I gave it a bit more care and I was like, I don't want to ruin this dog further or like I don't want to do anything that might cause him harm. And I started looking into it and I was like, oh my goodness, they need to teach this in schools because nobody knows it.
Exactly. And I mean, and we don't really need it because we don't go around, meeting random dogs on the street because I speak about Europe or whatever, UK and Italy, there are not free dogs in the street. So there is not that risk, right? But in countries where there are free roaming dogs, and especially in countries where there is rabies, education should be one of the first ways to tackle, right, the issue,
Yeah.
because with knowledge you can get rid of fear, and then people know how to behave around dogs, and then conflict is diminished. Yeah.
It's a problem, and I think, I mean, again, we didn't mention this at the start of this question, but there are countries where street dog populations are not treated as community dogs, and it has become such a problem that ultimately there is no solution except to cull the dogs, like in Romania, in Vietnam, and these are horrendously sad cases where obviously there is a lot of suffering from both sides, from the people who live in these communities and from the dogs. But Sri Lanka in this case is not really that, as I understand it. Like people have kind of developed a synergy with the dogs.
It's different, and also there is something different here is that the dogs that you will see on the street, they are these land raised dogs. They're proper street dogs. They are not mixed with breed dogs, because breed dogs are something that there are here but is not so widespread still, and they will be kept confined because they're seen as more valuable, so they're not allowed to free roam and mix with the other population, whereas in other countries, like you said, in Eastern Europe, um, pet dogs have been abandoned or have been allowed to free roam, and they have been mixing with the street dogs. And so also the dogs that came out of their generation after the generation are really different. You have very large dogs, you have garden breeds, and with that comes also different series of issue, I would suspect, no?
Personalities as well. Like every dog's an individual, and if you get certain breed traits mixed with a certain personality type, it can be difficult. Like I think, yeah, it's neither of us is perhaps as informed on that, so I'm not sure, but it sounds like a complex situation. So I think when tourists see a dog on the streets, if they come from a country where community dogs, street dogs are not so common, their first instinct is to assume they need help. Like in my story with the puppy with the injury on its head, like it's lovely. Like tourists kind of rush around the dogs and they want to help them, they want to do what they can. However, that isn't always the case, right? Like, not every dog needs help, particularly dogs that are not injured, and it can cause more problems than it can solve. I've seen you talk about this multiple times, and you're really good at explaining. So, can you talk a little bit about this and what issues kind of bring up? Why is it not always the best solution to try and jump in and help a dog?
Yeah, so I strongly believe that everybody that tries to help comes from a genuine place of compassion and wanting to make a difference. But there is the main issue is, like we were saying, when you're not used to see dogs around you, dogs that could be suffering, you are moved by this sense of urgency. So you want to act fast to change the situation. And when we are moved from our emotion and this sense of urgency without understanding the context within we are in, as you said, we can create sometimes more harm than help. So something that I always say and I always invite people to do when they come and visit other countries is that when they are taken by this sense of shock, to just pause for a moment and try to understand the situation before actually acting on this emotion, this strong emotion. Understanding the context is very, very important because it will help us make more informed decisions that will actually be helpful to the dog and to the community around those dogs. So, as I was saying before, it's really, really important not to see these dogs through the pet lenses. So these dogs are not lost pets, right? They were there before we came to visit the country, and they will continue to be there once we leave. So, and also, all the puppies are a strong subject because, they're so vulnerable and they're so cute and they're so defenseless. So those are the ones that normally move a lot the heartstrings of travelers. But we also need to remember that many of the adult dogs that we see around us, they were once puppies, right? So they have survived, they have the ability to survive. So it's important to remember what these dogs are so we can help them in a different way. And it's also very important to understand the context in which we are, because when we come to this country, we just bring with us our own biases and our own system, like we were discussing before, the shelter system. So we believe that if we call the local shelter, they should straight away intervene and help that dog, right? Because that's how it works. But that's not how it works here. There are not state shelters. The people that help dogs on the territory, they are non-profit organization, and there is a very limited amount of them, and there is millions of dogs. So who are we to decide which dog should take priority, right? Just because we encounter that dog in that specific moment. So most of the organization here are overwhelmed, overrun, and underfunded. If you look at the number of organizations, there are probably a dozen. So a dozen organizations versus the 2, 3, 4 million dogs. If we do a bit of a quick math, we understand that it's not possible to help them all, right? And so we need to find ways to help these dogs in a more sustainable way. That's why I'm a huge advocate for spay and neuter and vaccination and for helping dogs in their territory. So if a dog needs immediate vet care, like the puppy you mentioned with the head injury, what can we do? We can call the local shelter to ask for advice on what to do, because they will be the best to advise you what to do. But we can also speak with the community around us and see if anyone, for example, owns that dog in whatever extent, if anyone has already helped that dog, because another problem is wasting resources, the same resources on the same dogs, because no one asks around if someone helped already.
Or
Again, taking into
like giving them too much as well. Like if imagine someone had double dosed
exactly,
them, it's more dangerous.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. For example, that local person you said already had medicine, and then someone goes there, picks up that dog, and gives again medicine, like that will be actually dangerous. So it's really, really important to understand the context, speak with the people around you, ask for advice to the local organization, but not pretend that they help. That they are there to take care of all the dogs on the territory. We can definitely help and be proactive about it, but we need to do it understanding the context, because if we don't do that, we may create more harm than good. So that's really, really important. um,
Yeah. You mentioned, so obviously, just want to really highlight something you said. You mentioned that there are about a dozen organizations in the whole of Sri Lanka when we're looking at, 3 to 4 million dogs, and we've got maybe 12 to 15 shelters operating, all non-profits. some foreign owned, some Sri Lankan owned, kind of doing their best. And again, probably not that many vets either operating within this framework. So, like you said, if we as a tourist go in and we've seen a dog that all dogs are cute, right? We've seen this dog that we love it and we're obsessed with it and we want it to get all the help that we think it should get, whether it's injured or it's looking skinny or it's just alone. It's not for us to decide that that dog takes priority over another dog because often these shelters, from what I saw as well, are dealing with the most urgent triage cases of dogs that literally can't survive on the street and need to be taken in, not just dogs that look really sweet.
Exactly, and that's a huge problem. Me having worked in the in various shelters, I would receive constantly, on social media requests like, "Oh, can you take this dog in? Is skinny," or "Can you take this dog is without fur?" Like not having fur. I know it sounds harsh, but not having fur or being skinny is not a matter of urgency, and it's not a matter of being taken into a shelter. We are people in the rescue world are dealing with huge maggot wounds. They're dealing with burns, with disabled animals, amputation. It's really, it's tough to understand because obviously all dogs need help, but there are limited resources, and those limited resources needs to go to the cases that need the most, that is life or death situation. And the biggest is puppies. Shelters will not take puppies in because there are puppies everywhere. The puppies, if they are removed from the territory, we remove their chances of survival, of adaptation in the territory. They need to learn to be in their territory to survive.
Yeah. And can we talk about this issue of territory then? Because we're going to come on to sort of other reasons about this in a second. But dogs need to stay where they understand the system, right? Dogs are creatures of routine, they're creatures of habit. They live in these communities, in these areas where they've developed bonds, let's say, with people, for want of a better word. And people have come to help them, to know what they need. They know what they've been fed. They know who's feeding them before. The dogs have this like routine of going around. So what happens when we remove a dog, say, from that environment? Like, let's say a shelter won't take them, and we think, right, well, I'll take them down to Welligama. I'm in Ella, I'm going to take them down to Welligama. I'm going to try and get them some help down there. What's the issue there?
Well, that's a huge, huge issue because basically we are stripping these dogs from everything they have ever known, especially if they are adult dogs, which is kind of different from puppies. So it really depends on the situation. But if you remove an adult dog that is well adapted to this environment and you displace it and put it in another environment, you really risk to lower its survival rate because these dogs will need to learn to adapt completely to a new environment, find new feeding spots, find new friendly people, trying to get themselves integrated in the territory of other dogs. And that can lead to their death, really. If those dogs are, for example, not used to be on highly trafficked areas, they could end up in road traffic accidents or, there is not much difference in climate, but that could also be something. And the same happens with puppies when people pick up puppies during their travels and decide to, bring them along during their 2 weeks trip around Sri Lanka, and they start having those dogs on a leash and a collar, or taking them to cafes and everywhere in their bag and sleeping in their bed with them and eating only dog biscuits or I don't know, fresh meat and stuff. And then when that 2 weeks travel finishes, when the person starts understanding the local context and realizes that no one will take that puppy, and the person itself is not ready to fully commit to that puppy, because many people act on this urgency, but they don't make long-term plans, right? So they're like, oh, tomorrow I'm leaving the country, I don't know what to do with this puppy. So what they end up doing is either putting the puppy in a new place, which is a certain death sentence, or dumping the responsibility on other local people, which again, it's something that happens really often. Maybe the person will say, yes, yes, don't worry, I will take care of this puppy. Then the person leaves the country and actually the puppy is being put out on the street because, again, there are 4 million dogs. Like, people that live here, if they wanted the dog, they would probably pick it up from the street, right? They don't really need someone else coming around and offering the puppy that they have found. So, again, this is not a way of helping dog. This is actually a way of decreasing their survival chances, which is very, very sad. And it's also sad that we strip them away from everything that they've known and they've built to
Yeah,
just
also because
put them
dogs,
somewhere else.
I think it's very important for people to understand that dogs navigate the world through their nose. So it's not just like you're removing certain familiar things and saying, like if we're a human, you move to a new area, things might look different, but if you're in the same country, like it's going to be kind of similar. But dogs navigate through their nose, so all of the smells will literally just be gone. And you're then like it's traumatic. It's terrifying to suddenly place them somewhere. They just don't, it's not even that they don't see familiar things, they don't know anything.
Basically, you remove completely their safety. They felt safe in the territory that they knew and that they knew how to navigate, like they know everything. They map the area. They will know all the dogs that lives there, all the people, all their routine. They will have their own routine. And then when you take them away from there and just put them in a new place, they basically have to start from zero. And that's the same experience that would be for an abandoned pet, right? Then they don't know where they are and you're just displacing them and leaving them in a new area. So yeah, that's very sad.
It was very shocking to me to hear that people did that because I can understand somebody picking up a puppy and then sort of being like, oh, I want to take it to the vet, I want to help it, I want to do something with it, and then realizing, oh, actually, I've gotten this wrong, the infrastructure is not what I thought, and I can't get it the help that I need. I'll put it back where I found it. I can understand that. What I cannot understand is somebody just adopting a pet for 2 weeks and then leaving it. It's so strange to me.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're doing that, like, I would love to know why. I don't get it.
Yeah, same, same. We had recently, I think social medias are a big part of the issue, unfortunately. But I just saw recently a friend send me of this guy that was traveling in Ella and pick up this dog, brought it to the room inside the guest house. The guest house owner sent a message and be like, "Do you have a dog? You're not allowed to have a dog." And then he took it for a drive on the scooter, and he took it to see the waterfall, and then he took it in a cafe, and and he was doing all these stories about, oh, you see, his probably this is his first ride, his first time being in a cafe. So like people think that they are doing something positive to this dog. There is like they're completely oblivious about the reality of the fact that the dog doesn't need a ride on the scooter and doesn't need to see the waterfalls, that they're stripping them away from their territory and their way of finding resources. Even, picking up a dog for 2 weeks and feeding it every day. Yes, you're feeding it for 2 weeks and the dog is happy for those 2 weeks, but then once you go, this dog has lost his sense of where to get resources, and then what's going to happen to that dog? It's going to starve because it doesn't know where to get food.
Anybody who works in rescue or has had a rescue dog will probably be familiar with the 3-3-3 rule. So dogs tend to operate in, this is very loose, obviously, and you will know about this, but like dogs tend to operate in stages of three. So you get the first 3 days is them decompressing in a new area. The first 3 weeks is when they start to figure out routines, start to learn like what you do and adapt to it. And then after 3 months, they feel like they're home with you. So, firstly, like if you take a dog in the first 3 days, they will be freaking out. Like dogs that have been displaced, put into a new environment, they are mapping the world. They're trying to figure everything out. If you're taking them to waterfalls in scooters, introducing them to new dogs, new smells, new peoples, this is not a kindness. This is so frightening for a new dog. Like, I don't think we can express this enough. And if you get to the point where you're at 2 weeks, like the dog is starting to learn who you are and what you do, and it's adapting to your routine. And then you just pull the rug from under its feet. And if you're there for longer, up to 3 months, and you then leave the dog, like again, this dog will have adapted to you and started to believe that you are his home. It's cruel. It is.
That's cruel. Yeah, I don't find understanding either. I'm a really compassionate, empathetic, and understanding person, but I absolutely get enraged when this happens because that's not fair. That's something that people do in a really selfish way, moved by their own ego and not understanding the needs of the dogs. Yeah, so that's really cruel. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, A couple more questions. The first one is one that we discussed in advance, and I know I kind of know a little bit about what you think. I want to explain my own situation. So when I went to Sri Lanka, I did visit a dog shelter, which was Dogs of Ella. I thought they were doing really good things, so I'm happy to give them a shout out there. And one of the dogs that was in the shelter was disabled. And my husband and I actually decided to adopt her to bring her back from Sri Lanka because we believe that her quality of life with us can be better than it is there, mainly because she's disabled, not because of her being a street dog, but because it's quite difficult for her in the shelter for various reasons. However, bringing dogs from like places in which they are familiar to places they are unfamiliar, and particularly crossing kind of country borders and things, in ordinary circumstances, I think it's complex and probably not something that I would encourage most people to do. I don't want to sound hypocritical here, like I do think mine was a specific case, but in any case, there has been a huge uptake in this recently because of social media. So you and I have talked about it, but I'd love to know for the podcast, for the viewers at home, like what are your thoughts on this? Like why do you think it's come about? Do you agree with it? What are the issues and so on?
I mean, it's again a really nuanced topic. I have my own views, and I try always, and that's what I would also suggest to people. I would always try to ask what's best for the dog in front of us, right? For the individual dogs. So we need to strip ourselves away from our own needs and our own emotions, and really look at the dog that we have in front of us and ask ourselves, will be adopting, removing, shipping, sheltering, whatever the case might be the best for this dog? Because some dogs really need rescuing. Like the example you said, a disabled dog in a shelter. Yes, a disabled dog in a shelter is, well, I mean, it's pretty easy to give a better standard of life, right, if adopted. But let's look at the opposite example, like a middle-aged beach dog in a touristic area.
Yeah.
Like, I dare anyone provide that dog with a better life. Imagine this dog that has multiple people looking after them. He's got plenty of resources. He lives in a really safe environment on a beach with his dog friends. He has people that visit every year. He sometimes goes to their hotel, is accepted by the local hotel. He gets all the food he wants, and when he's sick, he has people that takes him to the vet and will house them. And I mean, and this is not an exception. There are many of these dogs. I know many of them. They are like, they are my favorite. I write about their lives a lot. And I would find cruel for anyone to either think that they can adopt that dog and give them a better life, or that they can shelter a dog and give them a better life. And, you know, it might be that you can give him a really, really good life. For example, you live, I don't know, in the woods, in a farm with like lots of space. I don't know, you don't work, you have all the time in the world, and all the resources and the money to give this dog a really good life. But still, we also need to look at the fact, are we going to adopt this dog locally, so he's still familiar with the environment, and we can make sure that the lifestyle can be, still semi-free roaming, and he can have all this social life and everything? Or are we thinking to ship this dog into another country, right? And so put him through this travel that can be hard for some dogs. Some dogs, again, is a walk in the park, but some dogs, it can be a traumatizing experience. And we have no idea of knowing, right? If then the rehoming process is going to be easy, and then if the adaptation is going to be successful. We have no way of knowing. So who are we to decide that we're going to put this dog through this process without knowing for sure that he's going to be better, right?
Yeah.
When we know for sure that that dog is okay exactly where it is.
I also
So,
think something else that really needs to be added to that conversation. And this sort of links back to what we were saying about the shelter model. And again, like I really don't want to be hypocritical here. Like when I'm talking about bringing a dog across the UK, my decision was based on the dog's quality of life. But it's very easy to forget that in the UK, in lots of countries in Europe, we are still living within a dog overpopulation crisis. If you want to help a dog, there are dogs in the UK that you can help. Like I have a rescue dog
exactly.
from the UK. I foster dogs from the UK. There are so many in need here as well.
Yeah, and that's again, that's another part of the subject. Absolutely, like why do we need to get dogs and put them through all that process of flying over country, when most countries have a shelter crisis going on. You know, there are a few countries in Europe that seem to have empty shelters, and I do understand if they go and help dogs in other countries, but most of our countries are not in that position. And also, this is something that I don't have the answer, but it's something to think about. In many countries, shelters have got really strict policy about adoption. You know, you need to go through a very strict process and tick a lot of boxes to even being able to adopt a a shelter dog, right? For example, your work, how many hours you're at home, if you have a garden or whatever. And I know that that makes it really hard for people to adopt. And there are lots of people that have a lot of love that they want to give to these dogs and give them a chance, but they are unable to do so. But my question is, if there are in place these difficult processes, I guess there is a reason, right?
Yeah.
Because it's easy to go and adopt dogs from other country because there is no regulations whatsoever. But what happens to these dogs, you know? So you come to Sri Lanka, adopt one from a shelter, the shelter will give it to you without asking you any question because they are so overwhelmed that they just want to see the dogs going to homes. So you adopt it, and perhaps you live in the center of London in this one studio flat, and you work 10 hours a day, and you don't have enough money for a dog walker. And then, you know, like, what happens to that dog is locked in all the time, start destroying the apartment. I don't know, the neighbors are gonna complain. And what happens to the dog? The dogs get left at the shelter, and they might even go and be euthanized because, you know, a difficult dog or whatever. So that brings a lot of other questions, right?
Yeah. No,
So we are going,
and it's such a good point. Like
it's,
we get a lot of people. I do understand. It is frustrating. I've been on the end of that process where it's like, shelters that are asking for a 6 foot fence around the garden and you don't have that, you have a 4 foot fence around the garden. And it is the default to sort of say, well, why do you have this measure in place? But then, I have friends in rescue who are saying, well, the reason that's in place is because this dog can jump a 6 foot fence, and it needs this. And like you said, those measurements are in place for a reason, and we do need to respect them and understand that maybe we're not, in that case, the best fit for this particular dog.
yeah, yeah. And the opposite issue is that there are no regulation here. So literally anyone can, right, come and pick up a dog, and you have no way of following through what happens with the dog. There is no support system, right? There is no, if it's an adoption fail, where that dog will bounce, you know? And that's very, very worrying. It's something that actually worries me a lot because I appreciate people adopting and giving chances to animals in need, but we really don't know what happens with this adoption once they cross borders. So
Yeah, like even so, the foster dog that we had most recently, she was an older Labrador, and the UK has a good working relationship with Ireland because Ireland has a very severe stray dog population crisis and shelter crisis, and in any case, the dog had been brought across from Ireland on the ferry. It should really have been an easy journey. Wow, she was a mess. She just she was so distressed. So like the upheaval of the journey, other things as well. Like it's not easy for dogs to be relocated, and I think we definitely need to consider the dog's quality of life, like you said, and the fact that we have the dog. Like, can we help within our own rescue systems? There are a lot of factors that we need to be. It is hard. It's tough.
it is tough. And also I feel like well, people don't realize how much of a challenge it can be. It's just
Yeah.
like, oh, poor dog is suffering, I'm gonna adopt it, I'm gonna give it a better life, tick tick tick, that's the right thing to do. And we just after find out of all the challenges, right? So I do feel like there is a lot of need for education and support. There is no support for people that adopt, so support should come with adoption so that adopters can be prepared when the new dog is going to come. So they know who the dog is, the different, in other cases, the breed traits, but even with street dogs, they're wired differently. So no one prepares people. And many people that I work with or that I hear from are like adopting this dog, and then everything unfolds and they ask themselves, maybe it was better if I left it where it was. And that's a really good question to ask before
Cool.
you
Yeah.
act. Not once the dog is already there, now you're stuck with it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you need to be prepared. The education is so vital. But I guess the question that people are going to be asked, we've given them a lot of like, don't do this, don't do that. What can people do? Like, is there something that people can do to help when they're traveling, when they come across these street dog populations? If the dog needs help, say there's an injured dog or a very skinny dog, what can people do to help?
So, absolutely, they can help and they should help. They just need to stop 1 second, understand the context. Every country is different and every area of every country is different. So just do a little bit of a research to see if there is actually someone in the area that is helping dogs, and perhaps contact them and ask them what they need, right? Because they will know. And you can always, if there is a shelter, you can always sponsor a dog. You can always sponsor treatment. You can find sponsor spay and neuter events. You
Mm.
can bring medical supplies. You can volunteer at places. You can bring food. There are many ways in which people can help, but they should ask the people already in the territory what it is that they need in that specific moment, in that specific place. And I would say, try not to waste resources, because resources are really important. So if they're going into the right direction, they can make a huge difference. Instead, like even adopting, I know this is controversial, but even adopting and rehoming a dog overseas, it can be a couple of thousand dollars, pounds, or whatever, depending. And if we would use this dog, we could probably spay and neuter 20 dogs. That would reduce the suffering of how many dogs, like the ripple effect of how you spend your resources to help dog. And definitely also take take action instead of expecting others to help. So if you see a dog in need, contact the nearest organization and ask if they can help, or you directly take this dog to the vet and pay for treatment. When, for example, seeing puppies, instead of picking up them and trying to rehome them, you can always help them with vaccination and antiparasites to give them a better chance of survival, right? And then once they're older enough, you can always stay and neuter.
Yeah.
These are the really meaningful ways to help and increase their survival chances. So
Yeah. I would also add to that, learn some dog behavior and don't get bit because ultimately, like, if you get bitten, I obviously that's bad for you, but it's way worse for the dog. Like, the dog is usually going to have to then be put down. Just, be sensible, get your rabies vaccine if that's recommended, learn some dog body language, like, don't put yourself in danger, don't pick up puppies when the mum's nearby, that's just asking for it. And, like, yeah, that's kind of what
yeah.
I would add.
And also not getting the dogs to come to your accommodation or to the restaurant. So not feeding them near public spaces or like hotels and stuff, because that will actually increase the dog human conflict. So try to help dogs where it is, and not bring it back to your accommodation.
Amazing. Well, my last question is just what are you working on at the moment and where can people find you?
Well, people can find me on my socials on Instagram and Facebook at Spicy Dog Behavior. Also got a Substack now where I can write longer rants about how to deal with dogs, so then they can find me there as well. And I offer online consultation worldwide, especially for people that did adopt street dogs. Um, that's where all my heart is. I want to help people understand their dogs so that they can actually thrive in their new homes. And currently, I'm actually looking at writing a paper about a free roaming blind dog,
Ooh.
which is super interesting because, I hope to show the other side of street dogs, that they are not just disabled, helpless animals, but they can actually thrive also with disability on the street. So
Very cool. I've seen that you're helping a blind dog regularly in your area as well.
yeah,
Awesome.
that's him. Yeah.
Love that. Well, to be honest, I'm probably going to be coming to you for a consultation after we get our dog and see how she gets on, but probably. Um,
Well, I hope so, because I hope I can help. It's gonna be, yeah, it's a challenging situation, right? She's not only a street dog, she's also disabled, and that's amazing what you are doing, because I'm 100% sure in this situation that you can give her a better life. You know, that was an
yeah,
easy
so
decision.
it wasn't an easy decision. I hope so. And like I said, like I will still be continuing to help and rescue where I live. So I hope it was the right decision. But believe you me, I have thought about it long and hard. Anyway,
Yeah.
unless you have anything else to add, Vanessa, I will wrap us up.
Yeah, no, that's all.
Perfect. Well, this has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast, or you can follow us on YouTube on that_travel. We're also on Spotify. It's just the Sustainable Travel Podcast. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emma.